and endure suffering and overcome problems. So this is what those malefic planets do. It doesn't mean they're bad, it just means they have that quality. And so, I say this because this is why the nature of Mars to be disciplined allows us to endure the suffering and the hardship of being strong, because discipline it's not fun. Doing yoga or getting up early and sacrificing our happiness in the moment is hard. It doesn't feel good. It's not comforting. There's nothing about it that we actually inherently like, except for the fact that it makes us strong. And Mars is the part of you that likes when you can do that. Don't you like when you can do that? Mm-hmm. When you're strong enough to get up and it wasn't about me being happy, it was about doing the right thing. That's the power of Mars. And the part of you that likes being strong enough to do what you know is right, rather than just think about it and then kind of fall back into the same old lazy thing and eat the food that's not good and sleep longer and do all the habits that keep you weak. When we're able to be strong, it's the cruelty of Mars that is helping us do it. But then instead of being cruel to other people that we think are making us weak, we're cruel against our own weakness. This is the highest quality. We're willing to suffer for our principles rather than make others suffer. We're willing to do those things that are hard so that we get stronger. Saturn is the same way. So Saturn wants to do things, that aren't necessarily pleasant, but let's say that really needs to be done. If we're sitting around wasting time,
that's the thing.
David's getting nervous. He's like, don't just sit around and get up and clean a garage. That'll make you feel better, right? Yeah. When the wife with the Mars moon gives you a hard time, he's like, okay, I can sit here and be depressed, or I can get out there and clean a garage and do something, and also, see it in a practical way. Yeah. And realize and have appreciation, also just in the mind, having appreciation for whatever that person's going through. Saturn's a great influence. I mean, it really makes us mature. You had a question, Adam?
I was just going to say, this whole thing, you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, I should get up and meditate when Venus doesn't want to, but it's really, you're going to suffer more if you give in to your you're going to feel a lot better if you do the Saturn work. And you get up and you meditate and do your yoga, because then you can deal with life. Whereas you just sleep in and next you're like.
The way this works with the planets is Mars is the one that gets you out of bed. Mars is your actions in the moment. Literally, it's the actions in the moment. So Mars is the one that gets you out of bed. Saturn is the one that has made you realize it's worth it to do it, and you make a commitment to do it all the time. Your commitment to growth and to being mature and to realizing the value in that over time comes from Saturn. Saturn is really about time in the future and what we're making a commitment to. And Mars is our energy in the moment. And both of them work that way. Does that make sense?
Well, I have Saturn before, and
okay.
I have some of the same experience of processing emotional overload or just integrating the experiences I've had with cleaning the garage, cleaning the floor, doing those very practical and solitary things. So even though I have it before, I really see that in the integration process for me.
No,
too.
that's right. I mean, but you'll gravitate toward those things, like anticipating it's going to make you feel good or something, perhaps of this nature. When it's after, it's kind of like let's say after something has happened, then maybe you'll go and do something that's Saturn related, because you've experienced something. But either way, the thing is having this they're still very close to the moon. So there's still going to be this is a subtle delineation, especially when you get one before, like one after, this kind of thing. You can see and you can guide the person toward those kinds of things. Let's take a break right now. You guys take like a 15-minute break. Went a little bit over, but
you will do the sun in this pattern.
The sun is not part of it. It's the 5 starry planets: Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn.
So when the sun is
let's talk about it later. Let's wait for that. That's what we'll start with.
Great.
Did you say the 5 starry planets?
Yeah, the 5 starry planets, not the luminaries. Right. Huh?
Oh, I just.
Yeah, it's nice.
You say things and then I'll start dreaming.
Yeah, right. 5 starry planets.
Sounds like the start of a poem.
Yep.
Yeah, go to the, well, I feel like when they started making a living.
I mean, let's get it. They're all good questions. Let's get them in class.
Yes, if we had it.
We started doing it for, you know, and selling their work.
Isn't necessarily necessary, it's transportation. I've had because I have such a good return every day.
I do it.
Most people in my generation have. And they don't allow kids to have parents, and so Pluto shit is on my stuff. On my, in my, so I have, I go down there, my friends,
And play around, and
Rising
stuff, and I go home and I cut it up and do it.
rising sun.
I don't know that was, I saw this parka, which is a atrocious parka, but with a giant wolf ruff. So what did I do? I was thinking, you know, and they go. They wanted $25 for it, and I'm like, this wolf ruff was, if you were trying to buy that, that would be hard. It was this huge white wolf. So I, and the thing was made out of rubber, like, they had taken, somebody had made this homemade, had a sheepskin.
It's also, now I got
was
them
all
to
weird.
there too.
So I just,
You know, come on. And then it had this really ugly, there are, and that's why.
like converging ideas of what it's trying to make it look. Like expensive, except for quite. So what I did was, I took the sleeves off, took the lining out, made myself a sheepskin hoodie. The color was really beautiful, like chocolate. But it was really ugly the way it was set up. And then I took the rock and I turned it into a hat, it was like a big crown.
Oh, fun.
So I turned it like this.
Looked at it.
So I was like, oh.
Yeah, I know it. I have
Maybe a dress. That, cut the bodice off and turn it
Be
into
in
a
touch with her. Are you on the list? Did you sign the list for any other things?
It's my favorite clothes are like that.
No, my mom is so and my daughter really wants to learn to read. So
That's kind of how it
maybe we'll
happened.
skip generations or we'll end up learning from our daughter.
No, you know, that's kind of one of my family. I didn't know this was my mom's. Saturday morning. So it wasn't until I was 25. So my mom told me that I was so much like my grandmother. She would say, fabric. And I had no idea. I didn't know that. And that's how it happened. Well, I had a talent. She gave me a sewing machine. Because for years, since I was 6. Like, I remember getting my first little sewing thing, a little embroidery kit when I was 6, and so I was, you know, busily, I still have some of the stuff with like giant stitches, but making blankets for my dollies, and then she had gotten, my mom, who didn't like to sew at all, she had ordered this little kit of how to make clothes for the little, you know, she wouldn't let me have a Barbie. She bought me a penny doll. Remember penny dolls? Or pepper dolls. Is that like Barbie? Kind of Barbie size, no, but more, not so big, well endowed.
A little more girl shaped.
Yeah, girl shaped, like a 10-year-old.
Well, my daughter just got an American Girl doll for her birthday. And the American Girl dolls
Those are the favorite ones, right?
Yeah, so much yeah, you know, you can see they're huggable. What? I love because her body, she had to go, she's just, of course, the outfits cost the same as a grown-up outfit.
Well, now she can start making her own, like, have some that you buy occasionally, right, as a present, and then the other, you say, well, you know, you can always, you know, talk to her like she's the, well, you always like make your friends, like, go to the Goodwill and look at her cool stuff.
Well, what I'm hoping we'll do is make matching outfits for her and her dog. because she picked a doll that looks as much like her as possible, and she got her glasses because my daughter just started wearing glasses. It's wonderful to see her give this nurturance and care to the doll, because this is how little girls reflect the care and nurturance they receive. So it's kind of nice to see that, because then you know,
Get as much as we can until I'll check and adjust.
Yeah. But it's such a fun age, and you can see, yeah, I did a good job, because she was she's tough with her doll, making sure her doll is dressed, and her doll has a nice personality, you know? What's your name?
Simone.
I'm Sarah Jessica. Nice to meet you too. So anyway,
I'm having
in your chart, you have.
Well, I don't know, I have to go, I was thinking of running all the way back home to get my chart, but I think I'd rather go to lunch and
Well, maybe we can calculate it for you.
I don't know, it was a few years ago, I went online and I had actually gone to India and I was gone for medical tourism because my dad was getting a surgery.
So it's like, and it's like really stacked.
He passed away.
But not for that.
Not, well, actually, he got released online, but he didn't take, like, what was her side of cancer? And they didn't take any of the, for some reason, even though they were beatniks, my mom was she would flip between them.
Wow.
She had two personalities, I think, what happened was.
That is so, like,
visual.
I know. Out there.
And then the intellectual, like, macrobiotic.
Okay.
Okay. She had like, over time, she's drinking and with the guy from high school. Another friend of mine, guy, she observed all these women, and my mother, she goes alcohol, and I think so, because she had tons of stuff. I got all that stuff taken out of my mouth after I had my daughter, because they would turn hot. Well, yeah, my teeth were crumbling. Sometimes I definitely, my acidic or whatever, my stomach would get blocked. And I feel all like,
Well, it's a Saturn gift. Good teeth, good bones.
That's good. I had mixed. My mom had soft. And then my dad, I'm sure that both of them came. My dad was pretty healthy, but I think when he had like horrible, so it was stacked.
Electrician also.
Remember that bad, years ago. So I tell you that because they want to make me
I've developed foot fungus just in the past year or two.
Well, I've been trying to get, I wore my dad's socks, we were fishing, and then he was like, just was like, yeah, so,
Well, where does that t-shirt come from? Come on, they call it up for a reason.
it seemed like it was inside. I've been working at it, but I started to do. Well, no, what one was, I quit using was irritating. And I started having all this calming effect on my body. So then this friend of mine, I mentioned it to a friend, she goes, well, did you ever read about Dr. Simon Sini from Italy? And I just came up on the internet. He's a medicine doctor who discovered that all like what?
Oh, I think it's wired.
Fungus on the. No, I'm upset about my fungus. No, but we'll just do, baking soda. Maybe a little bit of baking soda and water, a little bit, not, it's salty, right? So, but that'll make alcohol. And then the other thing I've been taking is Phytoflex.
What I do is, when I notice it's creeping up, little tea tree oil. It's already diluted. I just drop it on, kind of massage it into the webbings, and it abates.
So, get rid of it. See, the thing is, I did that for years, but it never really, just sort of, like, hung in there. But I'm still.
That's probably good. I better go to the bathroom before we start again.
Run.
Run!
Run all day, run all night.
We're gonna reread a little print.
Just an update, we're working on the heating situation. Trying to engage the women who manage the business to failing that we're at.
Now I'm really curious, now I know where my moon is.
So let's gather back around the old campfire that has gone out. I think it's part of Stephanie's karma that we're getting. She's had heater problems. Now we're all. I'm kidding. It's her what? Uranus opposite Pluto, opposite Goofy.
Saturn opposite progressive Sun.
I'm kidding. You know, Pluto, Goofy. Yeah, I had one of my Vedic astrology friends. Yeah, one of my Vedic astrology friends likes to say that. Yeah, Pluto, Uranus, Goofy. It's a joke. People use it out of planets. It's mine. I actually look at them too. I think they're very good. So I got asked a couple good questions, and I want them to be asked again. One of them is about the sun, right? Did you ask me about the sun?
Yes.
Or ask the question?
The sun and, I just was wondering how the sun would affect
Right.
being in those three positions that
Right.
you were talking about.
Good. So,
Before with that.
right. So we're going to talk about that in the second part of the class when we talk about when the sun and moon are really close and combust, which is the dark moon, the balsamic moon. It's really a lot of impact, and when that happens, this dynamism is a lot more impact. One of the biggest things to know about the moon, and again, Vedic astrology puts a lot of importance on these things that are called balas, which just means sources of strength and types of strength. And I know in Western astrology, a lot of that, like I said, a lot of it, it's not, people don't really like to hear things like exalted, debilitated, malefic, cruel, strong, weak. They don't like to hear that kind of stuff so much because it sounds like it's judgmental. It's really not. It just shows specific things that it shows. And one of the things is that the moon really derives its strength from the sun. When to say its strength, it means what the moon, as much as I've talked about it, there's another simple thing to really understand about the moon, and that is this whole process is helped or hindered, or at least the moon's capacity to receive, feel, and integrate is most easiest, or it's done with the most efficiency when the moon is bright. The brightness of the moon is one of the most important factors in our capacity to receive, feel, and integrate. When the moon is bright, up around, and bright and waxing especially, but the brightness of the moon it shows the capacity of this. And I'm going to use an example. I'll just talk about this now because it's actually really important to keep in mind. This is the analogy that I use, and it'll make a lot of sense when I say it this way. You can imagine the interaction between the sun and the moon, and the brightness of the sun, the brightness of the moon, to be analogous to like having a pot of water on the stove. Okay? Let's say you have a pot of water on the stove. It's a gallon of water in a pot, and you turn the heat on. How long is it going to take that pot of water to boil? I don't know. How many minutes? 20 minutes or something? I don't know. Pot of water, let's say it's a gallon. 20 minutes before that water is boiling, right? 20 minutes, it can take all that heat. It can take a lot of heat. Okay? Let's say there's a couple teaspoons of water in that pot, and you turn the heat on. How long before it boils and evaporates? A minute, right away. When the moon is really close to the sun, it's like the pot of water with about a teaspoon in it. And all you need to do is turn the heat up, just a little bit of pressure. And it's... Do you understand this? When the moon is really dark it's like the pot of water with like no water in it. And then as soon as we start to get the heat of life, which is frustration, pressure, whatever it is, we're like, we don't have the, and so the person is often very afraid to receive, feel, integrate. This process is much less stable. It becomes much more in flux. And again, like I say, the moon is really it's the part of us that it's how life feels to us. And we have this continuity of experience and feeling and history and past through our childhood, and this identity, this feeling that we've had that goes back. This is all as the moon remembers all this stuff. This is what the moon is. It remembers and has this flow up till now that goes back. And this is what all of our attractions and aversions are based on as we experience it, right? Our past, it's like if we had a past where, like, let's say just even with a person, let's say I just met you and we talk and we're fun, we're fine, and all of a sudden you say something nasty to me, okay, I'm going to remember, oh, that's that dude, right? He's like that. Where does that come from? The moon remembers it. So we're always doing it. It's not just like some, thing from the past. Something happens and then we feel it and then we remember it. This is in the moon. When the moon is bright, it's like there's that full pot of water. You can throw stuff in there and it's going to absorb it, and the water is still going to taste like water. This is another way to understand it. Let's say you have this gallon of water and you put a little lemon juice in there. Then you put a little salt, a little pepper. Let's say just a little bit, like a little, say you take a little, I don't know, like a little bit in your hand and put it in there of each of these things. But it's like a gallon of water. You stir it up. You take a drink of the water. You probably wouldn't even be able to taste it that much, right? It'll still have its shape, right? It'll still have its taste. But again, let's say there's this much water in it, and you put a little pinch of salt, a little pinch of lemon juice, a little pinch of pepper or something, stir it up, and you take a drink of the water. You think you taste it then?
Yep.
You taste it, right? It takes it on. That there's not the sustenance of that sort of continuity of identity with that thing. So when the moon is really dark, these things the person becomes incredibly influenced and knocked around by their environment. You see? And those things in their environment you'll often see the person goes through a lot of wild identity shifts in their life. You'll see a person will just like sort of change overnight, like sort of grab onto this different emotional identity. They'll often change their life really quickly. They'll go from one thing to the next, like especially like when they break up with relationships. They'll really be trying to grab a hold of something to be solid in, like, oh, and this is just based on the brightness of the moon. Doesn't even have to do with this stuff. This shows the conditioning factors. But when the moon is really dark, you'll see that often they're not so nailed into their own sort of consciousness. Let me finish, and then we'll take some questions. So there's a power. There can be a lot of power in this because they're not so nailed into their emotional story. But at the same time, they often feel like they're kind of jumping out of their skin when they deal with adversity and emotional pressure. And one thing to realize, and this is in the scriptures, it says that the moon itself is watery and windy, which is called kapha and vata. Kapha is water, vata is wind. So that's what the moon is. It's watery and windy. It's watery when it's far away from the sun, and it's windy when it's near the sun. Just like when the water boils, it creates steam, vapor, vaporizes. And this is the vata nature of the moon. How much water is in that pot shows how much the capacity to endure what life is going to throw in the pot. How much lemon juice and salt and pepper and can I take? When it's bright, it's like, I can take a lot. One of the biggest things with the moon is patience. And the ability to sit there and not run away, not go, look, right? That kind of schizo nature in our mind that just wants to like block that thing out. Often when the moon is dark, you have a high capacity for that. And again, there'll be a lot of identity shifts and stuff, and these things become more important as anchoring devices, especially the planets at angles from the moon, which I'm going to talk about in this section. And this process becomes very dramatic. And any planet join the moon becomes really important when the moon is really dark. Because this is really kind of like, that's the thing that keeps their mind, that feels more solid. You see? Does that make sense? So this is how the sun plays into it. It's huge because the sun and moon are working with each other all the time. And it's the sun that determines whether the moon is, how much the moon is watery and how much it's windy. It's always both. But how much water is really there, and again, both of those analogies are really good because it's how much we can endure and also the identity of the person, because it's like if there's not a lot in there and you pour lemon juice in, the person takes that identity on really quickly. They don't have a lot of capacity to retain their own identity as easily when the moon is really dark. They get a they get a negative experience, and it's like negative experience. It's just like boom. It's not like it lands in a pot of water like this. Okay, negative experience. I'm still me. I still feel the flow. When it's really dark, the feeling of the flow is it's much more volatile. You pour a little bit of lemon juice in, and they become lemon juice. And so they start going, I'm afraid of lemon juice. I want sugar. That feels good. So that those things become much more extreme because of that capacity to have their state of mind hijacked really quickly by negative experiences. And the planets that are with the moon especially become very strong anchoring supports. They'll be very big with that thing because that's really the thing that keeps them clear. Does that make sense? So that's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. I was going to wait till later, but it's actually really good to talk about it now because it really sets the framework for how, the level of extreme in this thing. Like when someone has a really bright moon, let's say the moon is really bright, and these things, obviously they're always at play, but there's a real solid established psychology. Now the other thing about that is there's also a lot more attachment to it. Again, nothing is really good or bad. It's just what it is. It shows a whole kind of thing. So when the moon is really bright, the person really is established in that identity, that emotional identity, which can also have a quality of attachment. Like, this is me, my family, like people that, the moon is where we generate all this attachment. It comes from the moon. So often the person is really attached to that story, and they're really, they can often have they can't let go of family stories and history. It's not like any of it's empirically good or bad. It just shows it shows the thing that I showed, but it also has that thing going on. The person with the really dark moon can go from a lot of sort of crazy identity shifts, but many of them are really high. I mean, they can get into really high states where they're like, I'm just the supreme self. I mean, they can get there because that quality of I'm this living person with these feelings is very amorphous. So if they have good influences, I'll tell you someone who had a really dark moon, her moon was trashed, was an Indian saint named Anandamayi Ma. Have you ever heard of her? You've seen her chart. Her moon is completely burnt. It's like with 5 planets. It's just like in the 12th. It's just, and she was one who would just like lose conscious, totally into samadhi, like at the drop of a hat. She'd be sitting there and you see pictures of her, and she's just like, she's just like, it's like you're just not nailed into this matrix as much. When the moon is that dark, it can kind of go either way. So if you orient the mind towards something really pure, it's much easier to negate that feeling of that history and all of that story that's going on. Like when we try to meditate, there's all that stuff going on. That's the moon. When that's really dark, that's not going on so much. But it comes at a high price. You have to connect it with something really high, or it can go all over the place, you see? So it's one of the extremes, and so those extremes have a lot of potential volatility. But you'll often see the person will go through a lot of identity shifts when they make a change, when something changes in their life. It can be really drastic. And often it's around other people or situations. They'll like move, or often it's around relationship. Like if you see with women, man, they'll be like in this relationship with a guy or something, and then it changes, and then boom, they're right into something else. They've like chopped their hair off. They've done something extreme. Their whole identity changes. Things don't change subtly, or this sort of continuity of, working through this, and, this kind of thing. It's just like, wow. Because that moon, that identity, that sort of emotional identity changes very quickly. Does that make sense? It's really interesting, yeah.
When you say a darker moon, do you mean just, when it's waning and almost to the new moon, or after the new moon too?
Yeah, after 2. But usually waning and dark is the place where it's the most, where it's the most volatile. But anywhere within 12 degrees, 1 lunar day of the sun. The last was called Titi, or the first, when it's at that point, when you can't see it in the sky, when it's observable, it's gone at that point, you can't see it. The moon disappears for a couple days. So when it's in that state, that's when it's the most. Waning is more urgent, because a waning moon is naturally a moon that feels like loss. It's not like it's bad, but it's good for letting go. And often when the moon is waning, this is just another principle, the waning moon is more about letting go. And there's a sense of loss. Waxing moon naturally has a feeling of increase, just in general. So when someone's moon is waxing, it's considered a bala. It's one of the sources of strength for the moon. The main sources of strength for the moon is waxing and bright. Those are the two just general conditions. Then, of course, there are different signs, but its relationship to the sun and the moon have a relationship with each other, and the main sources of bala for the moon have to do with its relationship to the sun. Okay? Make sense? You wanted to say something? Or
I was just wondering, in the balsamic moon, when you were describing that jumping from one thing to another, and then you're talking about the saint. So,
Yeah.
in its, I want to say contracted form, it's like almost like to identify with matter, but it
Yeah.
also could be completely,
Right.
like being able to open to spirit, depending on
Right. Well, depending on,
On the person.
on the intelligence, and all the qualities of that, because there are other ways to look at. That's how you look and see which one it's going to be, because you look at the dignities of the planets and all this stuff to show how that works. But yeah, most of us aren't saints, and we don't have that capacity to sit there and sit in the heat of that I'm completely lost identity crisis, where literally it's like I don't know who I am, I don't know how I'm alive, I don't know what this is all about. This is what it feels like. This is really what the moon is about. It's really about our emotional identity, and the fact that our life has some sense of structure and continuity and all. When spirit takes form, it's the sun and moon together, and the moon is our experience of what it feels like to be alive, and who I am what it feels like to be me, quote. And when that's really dark, and what happens when that gets taken away? I don't know who I am. I mean, it's just like, it's like kind of like, the person's not so nailed into their identity. That can be a good thing, bad thing, depends on a lot, but usually people have a hard time sitting with that. But they're going to grow over time, and it'll be less extreme. And these planets that are around the moon, and that are up, especially angular as well, angular, which I'm going to talk about next, shows this support. It doesn't, let me just finish this, it doesn't show the flow as much. It's not the receive, feel, and integrate that we just talked about, which is this flow. Plants that are angular show literally solid structures like foundations. You might say they're almost all what you would say positive. It's like an anchor, like a foundation of a house. They show the emotional anchoring. So again, and in many ways, they're more enduring than the ones with the flow, because this shows a flow. It shows like, but when you got a planet in an angle from the moon, it's like these angular points show that solid foundation. Yeah.
Well, once again, with the balsamic moon, would someone tend to identify with others around them and micromanage?
No.
No, that's not right.
No. So, no. Any other? Well, yeah. What do you? I don't want to get too sidetracked, but I also don't want to just gloss over your question. I don't know why you would say micromanage or anything
Well,
like
like
that.
identifying, instead of not being clear about themselves, they would attach to somebody nearby and
No,
then
it's just
super
feeling
focused.
lost.
Oh,
What if you
okay.
just completely, every foundation of your life felt like it was completely pulled out from under you, and you felt like you were completely like thrown in the woods?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, it's that kind of feeling. You're not going to micromanage. You're just hardly
Yeah,
feeling like
okay.
you know what to do, right? The moon really feels like that to us. It's the feeling, and feeling like we belong, and that our life has continuity. And when it's dark, it's very volatile, right? And these planets, especially the planet join the moon, is very much an anchor. You'll see when the moon is really dark and there's a planet join the moon, that thing is even more a foundation in their psychological patterning. Because the first is really one of the angles. This is one of the angles from the moon. That's why it's the first angle. So it's joined the moon, but it's also the first angle. And the first angle is actually the identifying support, right? So that's why this creates that strong bias, like I said, depending on which planet is joined. So you just have to realize when the moon is dark, when it's close to the sun, these things become much more extreme. You just want to understand why. And again, you'll see in the Vedic text it always talks about this, and it always brings these curses to it and stuff, and there's definitely remedies. This is one of the big things that they offer there to be a remedy for it at birth when the moon is really, really dark because of that, because it can be it's one of those things that can just be very volatile and the person's unpredictable. So, but again, like in Indian stuff, it's often really made out to be terrible. It's certainly something, when I see that's in someone's chart and I know the moon is really dark, I know they have that tendency for some wild identity shifts is one of the biggest things that I say.
You mentioned that extremes aren't good. Would you say that you mentioned that bright is good, but you also said that too bright can be bad. So if you have someone that's in a full moon,
yeah, okay.
Is that going to be a negative also seen as?
Well, I didn't say
also?
good or bad. I'm trying to. I don't know.
Okay.
I think you're making it simpler. I try to explain the range of possibility. I'm saying one of the sources of strength of the moon, strengthening that process, is that it's bright. But that can also create a lot of attachment because we're attached to that identity. So it makes the life a certain way.
I can see that in my chart.
Right. So that's one of the sources of strength. And so when it's weak, it definitely is considered more. It's definitely harder. There's a lot more hardship, but it can also lead to more, possible gain. It's hardship because we don't feel as nailed into our form, like I said. And it's close to sun. The sun's considered malefic because it burns things off, burns things up. And it burns up the connection, and the desire of the moon is to feel that peace. And when it's really close, the only way to feel peace is to be like really join the sun stuff, join that like ultimate stuff often. Does that make sense? I think we talked about it.
It does.
I want to move on. Is that okay?
Yeah. It's interesting because you talk about the sun being the eternal self, and I would have thought that having the sun near the moon would have helped, but
It does, but how many people want to actually do that? It's great if you're actually like someone who wants to sit. Like I said, I did say it, but I'll say it again. If you can sit in the heat of all of that and willing to give up this world, it's great. So sit there. And like I said, it's very powerful. Even saints like Anandi Mai Ma had that, and if you're willing to sit there and have your whole identity in this lifetime and the feeling of being alive negated, sit there and see what happens, and you'll be quicker than the rest of us. But most people can't sit in that. Most people can't sit in the fact that my life is this life is just part of a continuum of lifetimes, and my past means nothing and this means nothing, and I'm just going to sit here. And really, when it comes to becoming enlightened, it's a wonderful word, but it's really willing to die consciously. People say moksha and liberation, and that sounds really good, liberation, but it's really lost. It's losing everything that you know you are, and willingly saying, okay, I'm ready to just step into the fire of death and sacrifice myself to the eternal sun. I don't need to eat, I don't need food, I don't need people, here I am. So that's what it is. That's the eternal Paramatma. So if someone can do that, or if they're oriented to naturally go into that state that's not painful, which can happen. It can happen. It's not like it doesn't. And in fact, when you see that, you orient a person toward that, you know that's in their mind, and you know they can do that. So I tell people that. I'm like, your moon is really dark, and I know you feel like you go through these wild identity shifts at times, and it feels like you're just not nailed into the body. Often you'll even see their eyes don't point in the same direction, literally. Like they're not plugged into the mind. I mean, I see it in the face. I can often look at someone and say, is your moon really dark? Eyes a little bit. I know. And it's like, yeah, I'm sure like when you have these, you have a lot of fear of like the things that you're attached to being taken away, because you can just get into these crazy identities. Oh yeah, it's like, yeah. So what you really want to do is try to cultivate these spiritual practices, because you have an unusual ability to just, relax into that highest self that the most of us don't get to. It's so easy for you to negate that consciousness that the rest of us are so attached to. But it's hard. So develop practice. That's all yoga is. And in fact, it's not even that hard if a person is willing to learn it. That's what yoga and meditation practices are for. It's not even really that bad, but because most people don't know it, when they're trying to live externally and satisfy that moon that's in the world, that worldly moon, that worldly mind, it creates a lot of trouble. So it's good to flesh it out. Does that make more sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we have the planets that are in the angles from the moon, like 4th, 7th, and 10th. Now again, these are like more solid structures, and this is from the moon, not from the ascendant. The planet in the 4th house from the moon really supports things like introspection, meditation. That's what the 4th house is. Introspection, meditation, and it's like an anchoring support. The planet in the 4th house from the moon, the person will naturally want to go inward toward that sort of thing, and they get a lot of comfort from, you might say, meditating on that thing, but that, we don't really meditate on something. It's really a state of mind. But there'll be let's say if they have Mercury in the 4th from the moon, then the person will naturally sort of gravitate toward, gathering information. It's the same kind of thing we talked about here, but it's an anchor. But it's a solid structure in their life, and you'll see they'll often do it that way. If it's in the 4th, it's more through being introspective with that thing. Jupiter in the 4th, they'll be introspective, studying scripture or philosophy or spiritual practices, gurus. You orient them toward these kinds of things. Saturn, they'll just like solitude. Saturn in the 4th from the moon. And when that happens, Saturn is also casting a special aspect onto the moon. Saturn in the 4th from the moon is really good for meditation, because Saturn also is aspecting then. He's not just in an angle, he's placing an aspect then there. And person can really feel the silence in the mind when you get Saturn in the 4th from the moon. Very good for meditation. So people ask, just a little autobiographical the other night when people, I was talking about I started doing the spiritual practices when I was like 18 or 19 years old. I have Saturn in the 4th from the moon as well, retrograde, putting an exact aspect and 4th, and it was in Saturn Dasha, the Saturn cycle, when that happened. So at the right time, that's what happens, like sort of mind that wants to meditate and it can just shut it down and feel that silence. This is Saturn in the 4th from the moon often really brings that sort of capacity. Saturn in any of these angles from the moon really brings that silence into the mind. Okay? So Saturn will bring that as an anchor of support. I really like seeing Saturn angular from the moon because of that. And also associating with the moon as long as it's not joined the moon as well, because Saturn brings that silence into the mind. When it's on the moon, it's a little heavy. But when it's around the moon, it's nice because it makes a person realistic and practical. 7th has to do, of course, what would you think? Other people, right? Others can be a real strong anchor. Remember, these are like anchors of support. Others support them. So they'll feel the support of others, often relationships. And these are often, again, usually with the planets angular to the moon, there's not the kind of irony with this. It's usually just the support. Now, they might tend to depend on it more and stuff like that, but it really does show support. Like, you'll literally see a person who has planets and angles from the moon, they get support from that thing. And it really helps them, literal support like money, and they'll feel that as a structure in their life. Which allows these other things, which allows all this stuff we're talking about the moon to actually take place. You see? 10th house is, people always say career, but 10th house is really about responsibility, duty. So it means that they'll really feel, handling their duties, managing their duties, and handling pressure and stuff. This gives them emotional strength. They get a lot of emotional strength from doing those things, from managing things and being in positions of authority. you know, especially from the moon, because the moon is where, you know, sun stuff we can often get it in abuse of authority because we mistake our power, blah, blah. But the moon is really where we want to connect and where we want to help. Planets in the 10th house from the moon often show where the person will step out of their emotional baby stuff when you give them a nice, healthy amount of responsibility. When they step into their responsibilities that they're willing to take, then it really helps them step out of that emotional immaturity, which we all have with the moon. Does that make sense?
And it's the responsibility through that planet, through that planet.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. We're talking about the archetype of the planet. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it's like, well, like you have Mars in 10th from the moon, right? Oh, Venus in 10th from the moon, yeah. So you're planetary apothecary. It's like, hello, right? Yeah, and so that kind of, you know, giving that kind of space. And you were talking about some other things, wanting to hold space for a community, and you know, Venus is like the nurse, the sacrifice, wanting to create beauty and harmony and all that stuff. So, that's an anchor of the person's mind. And if you go back, you know, and especially in the 10th house, you know, it's not like it comes from the partner; it comes from handling duties, and you'll see the nature of the duties and the responsibilities based on what the planet is, obviously. So, yeah. So let's say, what if someone has Mars in the 4th house from the moon? Again, it's sort of like introspective. Actually, let me put a chart up, okay? A lot of charts. I have several charts in my head. I'm just going to look at just the number of moons and put up some charts of people that I know. I'm going to do one of my sister first. We can look at charts too. It would be good. I mean, we could look at each other's charts too if we want, but it's often also good maybe to bring up a chart of someone that you know, where you know their chart, and we can, so you all know about it. Sometimes when it's personal, I don't know, it can get a little, I don't know, sometimes it gets a little tricky, where it's like, I want to be able to say, oh yeah, you're blah blah, and you're like, spot a little bit, and then you don't get honest answers sometimes. I've had that a couple times. So if you do bring up your chart, be honest. Anyway, I'm much more about looking at people that we know. We don't just say who they
You
are.
just call it as you see it, don't you say?
Me?
Yeah, you just.
Oh, no.
No, really?
No.
You're gentle.
Aren't I?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I'm Jim. In a public forum. So this is the orientation of the moon for my sister. So my sister, let's say the rest of the chart. She's got Saturn, K2 here, and she's got Sun, Mercury. Her ascendant is Scorpio. So she's a typical, I mean, this is like debilitated moon in the 1st. Right? People will look at this and go, oh my God, debilitated moon in the 1st, it's Scorpio, right? She's got Sun, Mercury in the 8th house. I mean, there's a lot of things people would be like, you know, actually, Rahu here. And I mean, this is the debilitated moon in the 1st, and it's like the actual debilitation degrees of the moon, which is really important, is it's actually 3 degrees Scorpio, using sidereal, and hers is like 6. It's really close. It's like when she was like in the process of coming out, the moon was at its deepest stability. So this is real debility, and the ascendant.
Whose chart is this?
This is
again?
my sister.
Okay.
But
You have Jupiter,
Still-
which is both in Aquarius and Gemini.
this is the sun. Sorry.
Oh, Sun.
Okay. Anybody else?
So she has a debilitated moon in Scorpio, is that what you said?
Yeah. So I'll explain the chart. Okay. So her moon is here. This is Scorpio. She has no planets around the moon, for instance. Okay. There's nothing before, nothing with, nothing after. Okay. This is a good example of angular planets. Any planets angular? You see?
Jupiter and Venus.
Jupiter, Venus.
And Mars.
She's got 3 angular planets. Okay. Don't even look at the dignities or the, I mean, that's definitely a big part of it too, is like the nature of the stuff that happens. But just knowing this, there's going to be support for Jupiter in the 4th from the moon. What kind of support do you think that would give? So first of all, what's the nature of Jupiter?
Philosophical.
Philosophical is a great word to just remember. It's just good to get that and what that means. Philosophical, looking for meaning. It's in the fourth angle from the moon, which, what is the fourth? About
Introspection.
And meditation.
meditation, introspection. So you think just seeing Jupiter in the fourth from the moon would make a person, like, let's say, religious, philosophical?
Or reading scripture, seeking
Always,
eternal knowledge.
always, yeah, right. So this is a strong support in her life always. When we were kids, we had no religious, nothing. But she just always like read the Bible. Just always, I mean, I was the heretic. I couldn't have cared less when I was growing up. Couldn't have cared less. But it's very traditional. But she's always been seeking no more than that. It's not just that, but that's always been a framework in her mind. It's just part of her life. Is that you have to find an answer, and she's always been looking for the answer. There's been a lot of disappointment in it because she's trying to find it much more traditional, not so mystical, because Scorpio moon wants the juice, and she hasn't found it in this. But without getting into all that, fourth from the moon, Jupiter, introspection, definitely. This has been a big part of her life, reflecting upon the meaning of life and developing of her own philosophy, and actually a traditional approach, because Jupiter is actually very traditional, especially when he's in masculine signs, because it brings up more of the Sagittarius. Feminine signs, he's more mystical, like Pisces, not as traditional. Definitely Jupiter in Aquarius, you would see that, looking for an answer. Just say our childhood was very disoriented, very, very, divorce, nothing, no good examples. So in the midst of that, though, she always had faith. This is the big thing, influencing her mind. Mars in the seventh, what do you think? Partners? Think she'd get partners? What do you think? She's been married twice. Both of her partners are good providers, good family, the whole thing. Good partners, yeah. She's gotten support, always. Always had partners, been married twice. The first marriage was for, 13 years or something. Made a couple kids. Then she got out of it because it wasn't a great marriage, but it gave three kids, and all like that. But it's an anchor in her life. This is a debilitated moon in the first, and these are support structures in her life. Support from other people, partners.
Good provider, Taurus?
Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah, good provider, good money. Her husband now, they live in a great house. She's always had also great house. You can also look literally, fourth house is also home. She's got Jupiter in the fourth and the moon also. Same family, all this stuff. Great blessings. You can take it deeper. I'm just trying to give ideas of how it anchors the psychology, but of course, the psychology is also really anchored by a good house and having space that makes our psychological life, which is fourth house, settled. If we're always up and down moving, we can't relax. So again, this is supported. Introspection and just luck and wealth also helping her home. Partners, Mars in the seventh, always had support. And then Venus in the 10th. What is the 10th house?
Responsibility and duty.
Yeah, and it often translates into our career as well. Venus. What type of work do we say Venus? I said earlier.
Interior decorator.
But up there, stage? No?
Nurse. Type medical profession. Always. She's actually done thing with the eyes. She's been an ophthalmology technician. And I'm not saying at some point, when she was in high school, she always knew what she wanted to do, and she's always done it. In medical profession, like a nurse. She's not a nurse, she works for ophthalmologists. She's smart enough to make some money. See, these are also aspecting each other. This is called Chandramangala Yoga, Moon Mars. She makes a lot of money on her own. She's always known what she's wanted to do. Even though we came from this background where we weren't given any example. We had no one went to college, it was just a really not an elevated experience at all. She always had faith. She went to vocational school, went to college, went to a technical school right out of high school, and was making, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year 25 years ago in ophthalmology as an ophthalmology technician. Kind of like a dental technician, you know how much money they make, but with doctors, that do ophthalmology. So again, just anchoring her psychology on this duty, and it's Venus related, totally Venus related. And the other thing, you all mentioned it, and it's totally there. Someone said stage,
Yeah,
Oh.
actress.
loves it. Community theater her whole life. Loves to do community theater her whole life. Of course, Venus and Leo. Now this is sidereal zodiac and full house, full sign system. But totally into that. Since she was a kid, she was in high school plays and all that stuff. Again, as kids, we had no encouragement to really do anything, actually. I was really just a total, drugs, totally falling apart, actually. And she was, when we were young, she was just together. She's like, going to do this, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to do that, and did it. Always known she wanted to do it, and it's been very solid. And this is debilitated moon in the 1st, sun, Mercury in the 8th, but I use this as an example because of the power of these planets angular from the moon. They're also angular from the ascendant also. So this is the thing about when you get moon in the ascendant, not necessarily the greatest place because it's a very emotional life. And it's better that we have the moon a little bit further away from our immediate experience in the moment. She's definitely really emotional. And it's better when the moon is a little further away. Like, the moon in the 4th has the highest what's called directional strength because it's a little bit further away from our immediate experiences. So she can definitely be a handful at times. But she's, learned. But all this stuff gives enormous emotional support and anchoring to her life and to her mind, of course. And as a woman and raising a family and stuff, it's brought a lot of satisfaction. And also her duties with her kids and stuff, all that is just like, brought a lot of good stuff. And these are also aspects. So there's a lot of ways to look at it, but this is a good example of the specifics of how angles from the moon work.
Would Venus in the 10th position from the moon also imply someone who could be tremendously fulfilled by supporting other people's creative endeavors?
Yeah. Hang on. Well, here's the thing.
Just in thinking about the nurse analog.
Yeah.
There are a lot of other professions where a person is the nurse or the midwife or they help other people.
No,
do
she's very
their
much,
stuff.
and especially, there are a couple things, and I'll just say she's been, it's not necessarily shown so much by this, but this quality of being supportive of others is definitely, well, for one thing with her kids, but she's also been very supportive of me, actually, as her brother, because we actually get along really well. Some of that is shown because you got these planets in the 3rd. These are actually powerful planets in the 3rd. But yeah, you can definitely see where, even just in that job, she's being supportive of others because they're going through this thing, and there's a lot of that caregiving. And when she's also done a lot of sort of community organizing, and even like in the plays and stuff that she's done. And she's not paid for this. This is just what she likes to do. Venus is a lot of what we like to do. And the things that she likes to do, so again, you can look at this. The things that she likes to do give her emotional support. Because Venus, which are things we enjoy doing, things, the beauty that we want to bring into the world, especially with the theater and stuff like that, that's not just a job. The job has always been, it's very Venus related, but then also the beauty that she likes to create it in the world, which is, it's actually singing and dancing, and she liked to do musical theater, that sort of thing. Was very much helped her feel emotionally supported. So yeah. So that's a good example, huh? Anyone have a chart they want to have? Maybe not their own? I don't want to do someone's.
I have my daughter that is super intense.
Okay. I want to actually make it here, not with what. What is it? What's the information?
Oh, it's she's November 9th, 1988.
Okay. What time?
4:33 a.m.
Where?
Fountain Valley, California.
Fountain Valley?
Yeah.
4:33 a.m.?
Yeah.
Okay. So this one's going to give us a good example of some planets around the moon. again, this is using sidereal zodiac, and so this diagonal line means the ascendant. Okay? Mercury, Moon, Sun in the first. Venus. Is that before or after the moon? What is that? After? Before. Avant. Avant la lune. This is Mars. So we're not using the nose. Okay, so we're just using the starry planets. We're not using our planets. And again, some people, you know, you could experiment with those things if you wanted. And this is whole sign, whole house system using sidereal zodiac. So what do we have here? This is the sign, but let's, you know, like we didn't talk much about Scorpio or anything that stuff in the previous. We're really not looking so much at that. We're looking at the relationship. So we have any planets before the moon?
Venus.
Venus before the moon. So Venus before the moon would mean what? This is what she wants to receive. What?
Love.
What?
Love.
Well, okay.
Beauty, a pleasure.
Yeah. Joy wants, her mind is going to gravitate toward things that feel like harmonious, wants everyone to get along, wants things to feel connected, wants things to be beautiful. Often people, Venus before the moon, they're interested in art. Is she interested in art? Very much. The mind's just gravitating toward beauty. Make sense? So it can be at the exclusion of other things when it's not beautiful, when people aren't getting along, when it's not that, it's like, this is harsh. I don't like this. I want things to be, I want there to be harmony. And my mind wants to feel things that are harmonious. Any planets with the moon? Mercury's with the moon. So what's Mercury moon? When she's feeling emotions, when she's experiencing her emotions, Mercury's there doing what?
Talking.
Does she talk about her feelings a lot? It's like as soon as something happens, it's like we're just talking, and you're like trying to help, and it's like, well, you said this, now you said, right? You have to just let the thing go. You have to let the Mercury go. That's just part of her process. How she's receiving her feelings in real time, how she's experiencing them, it's joined Mercury. It's like there's no separation. You see? Can you recognize that? It's not like like when there's no planet with the moon, I feel something, and then it's like, there's an environment that happens where the feeling is there. The feeling is a feeling. It's not an idea. It's not all this other stuff. It's a feeling. And then Mercury is somewhere else that would then maybe talk about it somehow. There's some distance. Or if it's joined, there's no space. It's like there's the feeling, and then there's the words. There's no separation. So why don't you talk about, since you brought up the chart, like how these things resonate. Well, first of all, are there any planets angular? No, there isn't.
And her sun and moon are less than a degree apart.
Oh my There's a gosh, quarter the sun teaspoon and of moon water
Yeah, that's right.
right together like that.
Right, so sun, moon, and ascendant. So there are a lot of identifying factors here. So she's plus this is Libra and Venus before the moon. So this is very much, this person, you gotta let this person like do art, be creative, or they'll just like go out of their mind. I mean, there's like no question, right?
Absolutely.
And so, and this, like I say, not to get into a zodiac comparison, but this would be all Scorpio in the other one, and that might be interpreted a bit differently. There could be intensity here, though. You can see that it's very much about, beauty, creativity, even things like music. Is she involved with that?
She used to be.
She used to be, yeah. I mean, often you'll see that. You usually need to see a little bit more water than that, but like writing, painting, what type of stuff does she? Fashion, yeah, okay. Total Venus, Libra stuff. Especially ascendant, moon, sun, and she's good at it. She's got Mercury there, an enormous skill. Powerful Raja Yogas here, really powerful. She'll do that, I'm sure. You can't stop her, but she's incredible yogas here. These are called Raja Yogas, when an angle and a triangle are joined in an angle or a trine. She's got Mercury, which rules the ninth, a trine, with the moon, which rules the angle, in the first, which is an angle and a trine. This is really powerful for manifesting this kind of stuff. So she'll definitely do it.
Manifesting what?
Manifesting what Moon Mercury for a Libra person means, which is to be creative and also skillful, and also she's also would be a good teacher. She would want to teach that. She probably, at least later, I don't know, 1988. What year is this? Was she 15? 22. 15.
So the moon in Libra is.
I don't know what year it is anymore. I don't believe I'm 48, so what? 22. So she's in school now, right?
No, she's got her first real job and she's going absolutely crazy and is ready to move to New York and go to FIT, the fashion institute.
Yeah. She's ready to. Yeah.
So the moon in Libra is ruled by that Venus before.
Right.
So does that have an impact?
There's a lot going on here, and again, one of the biggest things, it's ruled by this, yeah? This is what's called a Parivartana yoga. It's called mutual reception in Western astrology, called Parivartana yoga. We like to put this crazy word nobody can say. When they interact like this, then they're exchanging. It's exchanging with the 12th Lord, so it shows expense, it shows loss, it shows letting go. So it's going to feel like there's a harsh quality to make this thing happen, but there's going to be a lot of support because they're exchanging, which means they're agreeing to work together. And it's good when you have friends exchange because they get along. Mercury and Venus share mostly everything. Sometimes you get exchanges between planets that are harsh, like Mercury-Mars exchange is very harsh because they don't agree on much, yet they're always interacting. So Venus is also what's called debilitated, but one of the great things about debilitated Venus, it usually has what's also called Nichabanga, which means the modification of the debilitation, and the exchange is one of the most powerful ones. Anytime planets exchange is going to be really powerful, especially for that. So those are all subtleties. Sun is also debilitated in the first. This is why the big thing, she lacks confidence, and especially with that moon changing a lot. It's like moon in the first, again, gives that, and it's a dark moon, so her, again, the identity shift thing could be going on. She can get really, like, not sure, like, I want this, now I want this, or this kind of thing. But again, this Raja Yoga really anchors that. Again, that's why you can't ever just isolate something, because this gives a lot of intelligence, mainly this Mercury in the first, because this is really powerful for giving a lot of intelligence about what feels right to the person. This is confusing though, because Mercury Moon is confusing. Moon feels one way, Mercury thinks another way, and it's dark. So she can tend to feel one way one day the next, right? Can be very kind of sort of extreme in how she's looking at things, right?
And she hasn't been not in a relationship since she's been 16 years old.
Oh yeah, very, very relationship. Yeah. Where does you see that? Where do you see wants to be in a relationship? Why does she want to be in a relationship all the time? Huh? What part about the moon shows that?
Venus.
Venus before the moon. Mm-hmm.
Can you mention, you said the trine and the square, the Gemini and Cancer. Just say that again.
Yeah, say it again.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
run through that.
First of all, this is, of course, a literal, visceral expression. You know, we talk generally about Venus before the moon would be beauty, gravity, gravitating toward beauty, harmony. But where's the easiest way to get it? Relationship. Easiest way, right? She also food. I mean, does she always want to? She always snacking and having candy, gum, or things
She
like
used
that?
to be.
Used to be. Okay. And you see the dashas too. She's in Saturn dasha now, so that's putting it on. But regardless, okay. So regardless, the Venus before the moon is going to make us gravitate toward that thing. And one of the biggest things to understand about each one, I actually probably should have put it when we talked about it, but each one of the planets is a karaka, or an indicator of something. Mars is the karaka of, he's literally the karaka of siblings, like what it produces. Mars is the karaka of siblings, of course, that competition. Mercury is the karaka of, he's really the karaka of interest, not of necessarily of people so much, but Jupiter is the karaka of children. Jupiter will produce children somewhere along this. Venus will produce what? Relationships, the karaka of that. So You'll find Venus before the moon, always got to have a relationship. Venus after the moon, the partner helps them, the relationship helps them integrate, right? So the planets as Karikas have a big impact on this whole process. Saturn, I'm going to say, Saturn's the Karaka of, like, for instance, old people. You'll see old people, traditional things, electricians. Yeah. No, actually, labor, laborers, hard work. Okay? But I just mainly brought that out as far as the living things and the people and the situations. Venus is definitely relationships and pleasure in all forms, but like you said, you said she used to snack a lot and all that, right? And yeah, that probably did that and start ending around well, I don't know, maybe that's a long time. She started Saturn Dasha in 2001, so things would have changed a lot around then when she would have been about 13 or 14. Was that when the snacking stuff stopped around then?
It was. She had a big shift then.
Big shift
Different
then.
relationship.
Different, big shift then. So she was in Jupiter before. Jupiter likes the snacks. Saturn's like, no snacks. Screw the snacks. The other thing, again, I was telling Stephanie and you all too a little bit that the planets cast special aspects. And Saturn's aspecting Venus. So Saturn Dasha also is putting, this is an aspect. Saturn aspects 3 houses in front and 10 houses in front. So he's aspecting this Venus too, and she's in Saturn Dasha. So Saturn would put a little bit of screws on this Venus to make it less indulgent. So Jupiter's like, let's snack. Retrograde is an 8th. She was heavier then.
Yes.
Saturn Dasha, she lost weight. Yeah. So 2001, you would have seen that. He's also aspecting the Venus, and Saturn, we're going to lose weight anyway. So he said about the exchange, what I was talking about, this is called a Raja Yoga. These are very, again, one of the things about Vedic astrology is it's very clear about specific things and they show powerful results. And anytime you get an angle and a trinal house ruler, again, Vedic is very much about house rulerships. Each planet is different based on the ascendant. So the angles in the trinal houses and the planets that rule them form yogas when they join in angular or trinal houses. It sounds complicated, but it's not so much. Trinal houses are houses 1, 5, and 9. So the rulers of the 1st, 5th, and the 9th houses are the trinal house rulers for any chart. For Libra, it's Venus, Saturn, and Mercury. Okay, it rules those trinal houses. Angular house lords are Saturn rules the 4th, Mars rules the 7th, Moon rules the 10th, and Venus also rules the 1st. Okay, so if you get those planets mixing in angles or trines, it forms what's called a Raja Yoga or a King Yoga, because it brings together Dharma, which is intelligence, wisdom, and what feels right to us, which are the trinal house rulers, and accomplishment, achievement, support, which are the angular houses. Okay? Angular houses give support and structure. Trinal houses give intelligence and what feels good to us. So she's got Mercury, which rules the 9th house, with the Moon, which rules the 10th house. So you bring together the wisdom and power and joy of the 9th house with the accomplishment and structure of the 10th house. They're with each other, and they're in the 1st. First is the most powerful because it's an angle and a trinal house. So that's what it is. We're not going to spend too much time on it because this is a complicated subject, but that's what it is. So this is just what's called a Raja Yoga in Vedic astrology. It brings together angle and trinal house rulers in angles or trines. And she's got them in the 1st. So you see how much, like, if you look at this chart, you can just know what's in this person's mind looking at those things. She gravitates toward these things. She has this process when she's experiencing her feelings. Does that help you understand that, huh? And just by seeing, and I don't know how it cuts, probably in Western astrology, it's the same regardless of the signs. The signs change, but is it still Venus before and Mercury with?
Yes.
Yeah, it's still that. It doesn't change. It's the same house system. This is why I mean it's not really necessarily a Vedic thing. Sometimes you'll see things change, but usually you don't. I've looked at it plenty. Do any of the planets go angular? Is Jupiter in an angle? Is Jupiter in the 7th when you look at the Western? Or Mars, Jupiter or Mars?
Yeah, Jupiter's in the eighth.
8th, and Mars is in the 6th still? Yeah, so usually you don't see a change. I've looked at it a lot. So it's the same. Again, what changes between the is the zodiac. So I use zodiac I use for the reasons you just saw. I described the Libra person with Raj Yoga in the first, Venus here, and using the dashas based on all that stuff. That's why I use the zodiac in the system. Full house, full sign, not if this is 29 and this is 8, then this is the 12th house or none of that. It's full house, full sign. So this is the way the Vedic system works. So I used to do tropical as well, but again, when I started using the system, I use this because I find that this would describe the person better than if we had this in Scorpio and it was all that focused around Libra themes and art and all that beauty, like I saw right away. So if it was Scorpio, at least in this way of looking at it, it would be things that are much more about psychology and it's very different archetype. Can be some kind of beauty, some kind of creativity, but really Scorpio is more about personal power and really about like exploring these like deeper mysteries and often people that have a lot of planets in Scorpio, they're interested in things like you'll find like transformation and hypnotherapy or yoga and these kinds of much more intense kind of things, not fashion design. I mean that's so Libra, it's not even. Does that make sense? Anyone else have a chart? They want someone's chart? What do you know? People do. Whose chart should I say?
Me.
Okay, there were 3. So we'll get there.
We'll all get turns, right?
We'll get there. We'll get there. So.
Well, because my chart's a great lead-in for what you
we're
just said.
actually we're going into like the lunchtime.
Oh,
Just
hey.
quickly. It's supposed to be 12:30 to 2. Now it's 12:50. So let's say we do one chart and then we break for lunch, okay?
Okay.
And then we'll come back and do more charts. So it's okay. The rest of the thing we're going to be looking at charts and using the techniques. Pretty cool so far, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's your the chart that you have? Give me the information.
December 12th, 1976.
All right. 1 second. December 12th. This is your chart, right?
Yep.
Okay.
7:35 in the morning, Seattle.
That's your daughter's chart, right?
No, that's me. Oh, Jesus, how old do I look?
No, I'm just, I thought you said
I'll-
at first it was your daughter's.
No,
Seattle.
I'll follow up on that later.
Seattle?
Seattle.
7:35 a.m.
Yes. Because he looked doubtful too, and I said 1976. I have this
December
experience-
12th. Sorry. December 12th, 1976, 7:35, right?
Yes.
Wrong color pen.
Oh, God, oh, God.
Sound the alarm. I lose things constantly. Already lost. I'm the only person that can lose something where there's like nowhere to lose it. Is it somewhere? If I'm not doing something like this, that's incredibly complicated with like 10 million details, I'm just like, I need more details than I can think about. Give me an object, I'm going to lose it and misplace it in like 2 seconds. Uh-oh, be careful with this one. Don't get her mad.
Oh. I'm not that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
You give your own chart. You got to deal with it. You
Look
got to
at
deal
that.
with the
Sun, Mars,
consequences.
and you said,
Scorpio, Sun, Mars, ascendant in Scorpio.
Woo.
I said, be careful with this one. Don't make her mad.
Okay, yes, I do have a temper. That's true.
Don't make her mad. Okay. So let's look at the moon here first. What do we have? Planets in angular. Oh, actually, first let's start with before or after the moon.
Saturn before.
Saturn's before the moon. So
Is that a retrograde symbol you stuck up there?
So Saturn before the moon shows a person gravitates toward what? Things that are
Old.
Traditional.
Old is right. Actually, old, traditional.
Traditional.
Often you'll see when Saturn's before the moon, they've You know, they could have suffered a painful
Yeah.
loss. They could have suffered a painful loss, like had to deal with death early. Did you have any of that?
Absolutely. Father left my life when I was 1.
Father left her life. This is
I love my grandparents, very close.
Grandparents.
I'm great with older people.
older people. The mind's like, yeah.
And what could be more traditional than astrology? I'm
No,
really
that's right, right.
like ancient wisdom.
Absolutely. I mean, you'll see this is the greatness of Saturn before the moon as you gravitate toward things that are ancient, old, time-tested. You'll often, Saturn's the karaka of loss. That's why I said often people have lost someone, like she lost her father when she was young. She loves grandparents. This is all, the mind gravitates toward this. It says, I want this kind of stuff. This kind of stuff makes me feel connected, right? So when you feel that, it already establishes a paradigm. Now, you know, again, the thing is, it's because there's a conditioning with that thing. This is why the planet before is really has a lot to do with this, you know, this certain conditioning. So like even with your daughter, she was conditioned around a lot of Venus stuff. So growing up in the house, there was beauty stuff everywhere, right? Mom has that kind of thing too. It's actually very much an environment. So the environment of, what's your name?
Sarah.
Sarah, was that there was some painful losses, and you had to get realistic and practical about them. This is what Saturn does. We get the loss, and then something comes up. So you become realistic and practical and look for some kind of thing that's going to be stabilizing. This is why you gravitate toward this ancient wisdom, these time-tested things that are useful, and that gives you solace. Now, when things aren't like that, like things are just kind of silly and frivolous or this or that, you might tend to like, oh, I don't want that, I want that, I want that, I want that. Where's the serious, practical stuff that I can use? So this is how the filter of the mind. Maybe you could be less, maybe you have to be aware of the fact that the planet before the moon might create a lot of bias there, and you can be open to more things that are maybe more fun and frivolous and playful, or more maybe hopeful, not just practical and realistic. Maybe things that bring more excitement and passion, like Mars. Things that are more kind of just beautiful, like Venus. So you'll see that this can create a strong bias, but also be a strong support of what the person wants to receive to feel comforted. Does that sound right? Yeah. And you feel like sometimes you miss out on things, like if they're intense and dynamic, like Mars or Mercury, playful. Do you feel like you kind of that's kind of for this way and that way?
Well, I've definitely skewed more towards the intense and the dynamic. I'm much more inviting of that than I am, fun and frivolity.
So, the intense and dynamic. Let's take a look at, are there any planets in angles from the moon?
Yeah.
Which one?
Mars and Mars.
Mars and Mars, right. We don't count the sun, right?
Right.
We don't count the sun. Mars is in the 4th from the moon. So gravitate toward things that are intense and dynamic. It's in the 4th. So what does that mean? So things that are intense and dynamic, you really like to contemplate those things and really go inward toward those things, because Mars is in the 4th from your moon. So you receive these things that are nice and traditional, then you feel like the dynamism of them. And things that are dynamic, I mean, it's also a thing where things that are dynamic land in you in a place that's in the 4th from your moon, so they actually can also compel you toward that sort of, that sort of place of introspection. So really, Mars in the 4th, in any sense, brings a kind of inner, it's not turmoil, but it's just inner intensity. So, again, we look at the moon. The moon is the measure of it's like our emotional environment, our inner emotional environment. So if someone has Mars in the 4th from the moon, when someone gets to know you, they find there's a lot different going on in there. Not like it's bad, but you have to be willing, and you're willing to get in there and really get in there and go at it to like work things out. And because the moon is it has to do with our intimacies and the things we do let in, and the things that we want to grow and nurture in our consciousness. So especially as it relates to relationships and other things, if people are going to deal with you and then deal with your passion about them and your feeling about them, which is the moon, they're going to run into Mars in a deeper way. And again, this is a powerful Mars, actually. It's in Scorpio, and it's also in the ascendant, so she's going to have a lot of Mars energy anyway up front. This is a moon that's in the 10th, so Mars is in the 1st. She's got Mars Sun ascendant in the 1st, so she's going to have a very Marsy type of nature anyway. So this is another, all of these things are at play. Her life experiences, because this is the ascendant, are going to be very Scorpio-like. So it's good that you have the moon angular, because then it's not going to be in conflict with your moon. Because these are where you see conflicts. This is the stuff you look at. Ascendant, moon, you want there to be some kind of harmony of purpose here, or at least where there's some kind of interaction. When you see, like, for instance, this is why, again, it has to do with houses, a lot of astrology, Vedic astrology. When you see the moon in the 6th or the 8th house, the 12th house, areas where we're not so, see, the problem with those signs and those houses is they have nothing in common with this one. Like, if you want to look at it as signs, Scorpio, like Aries, Gemini, Libra, have the least in common with Scorpio. It's not a good example because they're both ruled by Mars in this case, but usually houses 6, 8, and 12 have almost nothing in common with the houses they're being measured from. It's a different modality, different element. Planetary rulers are enemies. Nothing is common. This is why those planets don't do so well there when they're in that place. So this is a nice connection between the fact that your moon is, that Mars is in the 4th house from the moon, and it's powerful Mars. It's in Scorpio. It's in its own sign. So you'll feel a lot of joy and a lot of emotional support by reflecting on these intense experiences in life, the ones that you want to have. Difficulty with moon in the 10th, I'll just say this as an aside, is person, as far as career and handling pressure, is like they change their mind a lot. The moon wants to feel good, and the 10th house is about pressure. This is why Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn do best in the 10th house, because they're the planets that want to handle pressure. The moon doesn't want to handle pressure, the moon wants to feel good. So when the person has the moon in the 10th, they change their not just their career will change a lot, but they'll make a lot of career changes. They might stay in the same profession, but their career will often change a lot, and they'll make business decisions based on what feels good rather than what they want to accomplish. Or, I like this person, so I'll work here. Or they get into too much mommying behavior at the workplace or stuff like that. They can get too emotionally involved with people at work, and nobody wants that at work. You go up and it's like you work there, you have this kind of work relationship, and they're too focused on people's feelings, like somebody says something, instead of just having detachment, they're too emotionally involved in it, right? Does that make sense? Kind of like the mother hen of the office or something that's too involved in everybody's emotional state. So that Saturn before the moon can make you a little more practical about that, but that could definitely be something where, have you noticed that, like, you make business decisions based more on how you feel rather than what you want to accomplish?
Well, I definitely have had a lot of changes. It fluctuates a lot, and as you can see, it's a dark moon. So the inclination to when...
No, it's not a dark moon. No, the moon has to be all the way over here.
Oh, good. Oh,
No.
it's waning, but I guess
That's
it's not
waning.
dark.
Waning isn't dark. No,
Okay.
waning is just waning. I mean, waning means that there's an idea of loss, not growth. But it's it would have to be joined in order to have that. So we're running long. It's 1 o'clock, and we should have been at lunch already. So let's end this now and take a break. What time do you all want to get back here? I initially said an hour and a half. That would mean you'd be back at 2:30. Want to do that?
It's 70,
An hour? An hour?
1 hour. 1 hour is fine for me.
Say an hour and 15.
There you go.
Okay?
Okay.
Say an hour and 15, and be back here so that we can start at that time again. Okay? Be back here at like 2:15.
2:15, you got it.
2:15,
The
and then
heat's on.
Huh?
Heat is on.
Yay.
Heat is on. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Okay, say questions for after, so we can do the questions when the class starts again.